The warehouse was filled with noise, barking, shouting laughter. But in one lonely corner, a scarred Belgian Malinois sat trembling behind rusted bars. His fur was dull, his eyes hollow. The sign above him read, "Abandoned military dog. Once he had a name, Max. Once he'd been a hero. He'd saved lives, chased insurgents, stood proudly beside his handler. Now he was nothing but a forgotten soldier being sold like trash. Once a military working dog, now abandoned and up for sale for $1. No one dared come close. He growled weakly, his spirit broken. The auctioneer's voice thundered, starting bid $1. The crowd chuckled. No one moved. No one cared. People stood around whispering, laughing. "Used to be a military dog," someone sneered. "Now he's worth just $1?" Another man scoffed. Who'd want a broken dog like that? But among the crowd stood a little boy, no older than 7, clutching a single crumpled bill in his tiny hand. His eyes didn't see an abandoned and injured dog. He saw something else, something broken that still had hope. When he stepped forward, his father tried to pull him back, whispering, "Buddy, that dog's dangerous." The child only whispered, "No," he said, staring into his wounded eyes. "I want to buy him," he whispered. The crowd gasped. Laughter rippled through the room, and then the entire warehouse fell silent. No one knew what was about to happen next. That this little boy was about to uncover a truth that would shake the entire city. Stay with us because this amazing story will leave you speechless. Before we start, make sure to hit like, share, and subscribe. And really, I'm curious, where are you watching from? Drop your country name in the comments. I love seeing how far our stories travel. The warehouse smelled of rust, concrete, and despair. Sunlight streamed through the cracks in the metal walls, slicing through the dust that hung in the air. Inside a corner cage sat a Belgian Malinois, whose once sleek coat was now a dull mix of dirt and dried blood. His name, though no one used it anymore, was Max. Once he was a hero, a decorated canine operative, a dog who had stood beside his handler through explosions, ambushes, and chaos. His name had been spoken with pride across the base. Troops used to take pictures with him at deployment ceremonies. Medals once gleamed from his vest, but that was before the day everything changed. During a midnight convoy raid, Max had lunged between his handler and an IED blast. The shrapnel grazed his spine. He saved a life that night but lost everything afterward. Declared unfit for duty, he was retired, discarded, and eventually sold off by the military to a shelter that didn't care who he was, just what he cost. Weeks turned into months. The light in his eyes faded. He stopped barking, stopped eating much, stopped believing anyone would ever call his name again. When the urban surplus auction listed him as Lot 72, aggressive Belgian Malinois, $1 starting bid, no one looked twice. To them, he was just another broken animal with scars and a bad attitude. Workers in steel-toed boots walked past his cage, shaking their heads. Too old, too mean. Not worth it. Each word landed like another wound. Max sat motionless, his ears drooping, tail still. He had seen the world's worst and given it his best, and this was his reward. But even in his silence, something inside him still flickered. A memory. A faint echo of his handler's voice, the warmth of a command, the feel of a proud pat on the head. That memory was the only thing keeping him alive. Outside the cage, the auctioneer's loud voice echoed across the warehouse. "Next up, Lot 72. $1 starting bid," the crowd murmured, unimpressed. Some laughed, and just as the hammer was about to fall with no buyer, a small, trembling voice broke through the noise. I'll buy him." Heads turned. The crowd parted, and there, holding a single dollar bill with both hands, stood a little boy, his eyes locked onto Max's. For the first time in months, the old working dog lifted his head. The old surplus warehouse groaned under the weight of noise and dust. Metal beams creaked overhead, and the faint smell of oil mixed with the bitter scent of concrete and sweat. The afternoon sun spilled through broken skylights, lighting the lines of people who had gathered to bid on forgotten lives, equipment too worn, dogs too old, and animals too tired to matter anymore. The auctioneer, a burly man with a loud voice and little compassion, stood on a raised platform, shouting prices into the crowd. $10 for the lab mix, $15 for the pup with the alert eyes. His voice cracked through the stale air like a whip. Each slam of the gavel echoed like a heartbeat, ending one story, beginning another. In the corner, the Belgian Malinois sat behind iron bars, his fur streaked with dried blood and mud. His eyes watched the people drift past. Men in work jackets, women clutching notepads, children pointing at the animals as if they were toys. Every few seconds, someone would stop, glance at him, and move on quickly. He was too large, too intimidating, too scarred. One man muttered, "Looks like he's been in a war." Another laughed. "Now looks like he lost one." The crowd chuckled, and Max turned his head away, closing his eyes. He didn't growl. He didn't bark. He just existed. The metal gate beside him rattled as another dog was dragged out. A younger one wagging its tail, eager to please. The crowd's mood lifted instantly. "Now that's a good boy," someone shouted. Hands went up, money exchanged, and applause followed. When Max's turn came, the laughter faded. The auctioneer cleared his throat. "Lot 72, he announced half-heartedly. "Former military dog, but not fit for work anymore. $1 starting bid." Silence. People shuffled their feet. No one moved. The auctioneer tapped the microphone. "Come on now. $1 for a strong animal. Anyone?" Nothing. Then a quiet sound. Small footsteps, soft and hesitant, echoed through the warehouse. Heads turned. At the back of the crowd, a little boy in a red jacket stepped forward, clutching a crumpled dollar bill. His eyes weren't filled with fear, only compassion. He wasn't looking at a dangerous dog. He was looking at someone who needed to be saved. The heavy warehouse doors creaked open, letting in a rush of warm air and sunlight that cut through the gloom. Every head turned toward the entrance. A small figure stepped inside, and a little boy no more than 7 clutching his father's hand. His red hoodie looked too big for him, sleeves nearly covering his fingers. But his eyes, wide, curious, and innocent, carried a strange kind of quiet courage. His father, Sergeant Jack Thompson, hesitated near the doorway, glancing around the crowded warehouse with discomfort. "Ethan, stay close to me," he whispered. But Ethan wasn't listening. His gaze had already found something. Or rather, someone. Across the room, inside a rusted cage, sat the Belgian Malinois. The light hit his eyes just right, revealing a story too painful to tell. There was something about the way he sat, proud yet broken, that made Ethan's heart ache. People were busy bidding on tools, crates, and a playful puppy wagging its tail. Laughter and shouts filled the air, but Ethan didn't hear any of it. He only saw him. The dog's body was scarred, his ear torn, his nose bruised, but his eyes, they weren't angry. They were tired, sad, like someone who had seen too much and lost too many. He tugged gently at his father's sleeve. "Daddy," he whispered, "why is that dog in a cage all alone?" Jack followed his son's gaze and frowned. "Buddy, that one's not for us. He's not safe." His tone was firm, but Ethan didn't look away. "He's just scared," he said softly. "Not bad." A few people nearby chuckled, overhearing the conversation. "That old mutt," a man muttered. "He's trouble. Wasn't even worth deploying. Another scoffed. He's only good for the scrapyard now. But Ethan didn't flinch. He took a slow step forward, his tiny sneakers crunching on the concrete. The closer he got, the more the Belgian Malinois lifted his head. His ears twitched. His breathing changed. For the first time in months, someone wasn't afraid of him. The auctioneer's voice boomed again. Lot 72. Node. $1 starting bid. The crowd barely paid attention. Ethan's small hand slipped into his pocket, pulling out a single, slightly crumpled dollar bill. His father's eyes widened. Ethan, no. But it was too late. The little boy stepped closer to the cage, his voice trembling, but clear. I want to buy him. The warehouse went silent. Every eye turned toward him, and for the first time, the wounded dog didn't look away. The warehouse fell into stunned silence. The auctioneer's mouth hung open, the gavel frozen in midair. A few people chuckled under their breath. Others exchanged puzzled looks. In the sea of weathered faces and rough boots, that tiny boy with his dollar bill looked impossibly out of place. Yet somehow, more determined than anyone else in the room, Ethan stood firm, his small hand clutching the worn dollar like it was worth $1 million. His voice, though soft, carried weight. I want to buy him, he repeated. His father, Jack, knelt beside him, his face caught between pride and panic. Buddy, that dog isn't a toy. He's hurt, he's scared, he might bite. But Ethan shook his head. He won't hurt me, he whispered, his eyes never leaving the dog's. He's just waiting for someone. A ripple of laughter ran through the crowd. Kid wants to buy a killer, someone shouted from the back. Another added, Let him. Maybe he'll teach it to bark at pigeons. The auctioneer forced a smile. Well, kiddo, this ain't a pet store. You sure you want that one? Ethan didn't blink. He stepped forward, holding out the dollar with both hands. Yes, I'm sure. The Belgian Malinois sitting behind the bars watched his every move. His ears twitched at the sound of his voice. The last time someone had spoken softly to him was months ago, back when he was still part of the K9 unit. Something in his tone stirred a forgotten instinct. Trust. Jack sighed, realizing his son's mind was made up. He turned to the auctioneer, his voice quiet but steady. How much for him? The man scratched his head. No one else bid. Guess it's yours for $1. The gavel struck with a hollow thud. Gasps and murmurs filled the warehouse. Some mocked, some smiled, but everyone watched as Ethan walked toward the cage. Dollar gone from his hand, replaced by something far more valuable. Courage. The little boy stopped just inches from the bars. The Belgian Malinois lowered his head, eyes searching his, and in that stillness, surrounded by laughter and judgment. A bond was born between two souls who had both been forgotten. For a long moment nothing moved. Dust floated in the shafts of sunlight, and the warehouse seemed to hold its breath. The little boy stood before the cage, his small hand trembling as he reached forward. The Belgian Malinois' amber eyes flickered between caution and curiosity. He had seen hands before, hands that hit, dragged, and chained. But this one was different. Ethan knelt down, his knees pressing into the cold concrete floor. Hi, he whispered softly, his voice barely louder than the hum of the fluorescent lights above. My name's Ethan, it's okay. His words carried warmth, something the old working dog hadn't felt in a long time. The dog's muscles tensed. His lips twitched, a low growl rumbling deep in his chest, a warning born of pain, not anger. The crowd stepped back nervously. Jack's heart pounded in his chest. Ethan, step back, he warned, his voice sharp, but Ethan didn't move. He looked into the dog's eyes, not with fear, but with understanding. "You're not bad," he said gently. "You're just scared." The growl faded. The Belgian Malinois tilted his head slightly, studying the small human who refused to flinch. His ears perked forward, his tail, stiff and still for so long, gave a faint, uncertain twitch. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Even the auctioneer lowered his microphone, eyes wide. Ethan smiled, inching a little closer. "See, you remember," he murmured. "You remember what it's like to be loved?" He pressed his small palm against the cold iron bars. For a few seconds, nothing happened. Then slowly, the dog lifted his paw, hesitant, trembling, and placed it on the other side of the bars, aligning perfectly with his hand. The warehouse erupted in whispers. Jack covered his mouth, his eyes filling with tears he couldn't explain. The once feared military dog, the one everyone avoided, had just reached out to a child. Ethan grinned through the dust and noise, his eyes shining. "It's okay, boy," he said softly. "You're safe now." Max's breathing slowed. For the first time in months, his heartbeat wasn't a rhythm of fear. It was steady, calm, alive. In that single fragile moment, something powerful happened. A wounded soul found hope again, and everyone watching knew it. Wasn't just a child who had rescued a broken dog. It was a broken hero who had finally found a reason to live. The air in the warehouse hung heavy with disbelief. For a moment, it was as if the world had frozen. Every whisper silenced, every smirk forgotten. All eyes were fixed on the little boy kneeling beside the cage, his hands still pressed against the bars where the Belgian Malinois' paw rested. The auctioneer blinked, clearing his throat awkwardly. "Well, looks like we've got ourselves a buyer," he stammered, forcing a grin. $1 going once." His voice cracked slightly, the usual arrogance replaced by uncertainty. No one else spoke. The warehouse stayed silent except for the faint hum of machinery overhead. "Going twice," he said, scanning the crowd. Some people chuckled softly. A few shook their heads in disbelief, muttering under their breath. "What a waste," one man scoffed. "That dog's finished," another whispered. "Poor kid. He doesn't know what he's buying." Jack stood behind his son, torn between worry and pride. He had seen countless dangerous dogs during his years in the service. But something in Max's eyes, something in the way he had responded to Ethan, felt different. Not aggression, not madness, just pain, and maybe gratitude. Sold. The auctioneer's gavel came down with a hollow thud. The sound echoed through the warehouse like a heartbeat. A ripple of laughter and murmurs followed, but Ethan didn't care. His dollar was gone, but his smile was brighter than ever. He turned to his father, his eyes sparkling. "Can we take him home now?" Jack hesitated. "Buddy, we'll need to sign some papers first." He glanced at the auctioneer, who shrugged indifferently. "Fine, the mutt's yours," he said. "Hope you know what you're doing." As Jack handed over the dollar, the old Belgian Malinois shifted on his paws. His ears perked up at the sound of Ethan's voice. For the first time in a long time, someone had chosen him. Not because he was useful, not because he was strong, but because someone believed he deserved love. Ethan knelt again, whispering through the cage bars. "Don't worry," he said with a small smile. "I'll take care of you now." And in that dusty warehouse full of forgotten souls, a story worth far more than $1 had just begun. As the echo of the auctioneer's gavel faded, a murmur swept through the warehouse like a wave. No one could quite believe what they had just witnessed. A 7-year-old boy had walked into an auction full of hardened adults, and with a single dollar bought a dog everyone else had written off. The crowd began to whisper. Some people laughed in disbelief. Others looked uncomfortable. He really paid for that thing. A woman muttered, "Poor kid doesn't even know what he's gotten himself into." An old veteran shook his head. "That dog's seen things he shouldn't have. You can't fix an animal like that." But a few others stayed quiet, their eyes lingering on the strange connection between the child and the battered Belgian Malinois. The same dog that had growled at anyone who came near now sat still, his head lowered, eyes locked on the boy who had saved him. Ethan stood proudly beside the cage, his tiny fingers wrapped around the rusty bars. "It's okay, boy," he whispered again. "You're coming home." His voice carried a calmness that cut through the noise. Even those who mocked him moments ago fell silent. Unsure why the scene suddenly felt so sacred, Jack approached the cage slowly, his heart pounding. Every instinct told him to be careful, but his father's heart told him something different. He crouched beside his son. "Ethan, buddy," he said softly. "Let's open the door together, okay?" Ethan nodded eagerly, looking up at his father with hope shining in his eyes. Together they turned the latch. The old hinges creaked, and the cage door swung open. The crowd tensed, expecting chaos, expecting the dog to lunge, to snarl, to prove them right. But Max didn't move. He blinked slowly, lowering his head as if he couldn't believe he was being freed. Ethan took a small step forward, his hand trembling, but fearless. "Come on, boy," he whispered. "You're safe now." Max's paws hesitated at the edge of the cage. For a second, he froze. Then with one slow step, he crossed the line that had caged him for months. The warehouse fell completely silent. No laughter, no whispers, just the sound of his claws touching the concrete floor and Ethan's small voice saying, "Good boy." And in that instant, even the harshest hearts in that room knew they had just witnessed something extraordinary. Max stood frozen just outside the cage, his body trembling with uncertainty. The world beyond the bars seemed too open, too loud, too cruel. Every noise, the shuffle of boots, the whisper of dust, the faint crackle of the loudspeaker made him flinch. Freedom wasn't something he trusted anymore. It was something that had hurt him before. Ethan, however, didn't see a dangerous dog. He saw someone who needed to be loved. Slowly, he crouched down in front of him, his knees pressing into the dusty warehouse floor. "It's okay," he whispered softly, his voice trembling with kindness. "No one will hurt you now." Max's breathing was uneven. His tail remained still, his muscles tight. He lowered his head, ears flat, watching him with those amber eyes that had seen too much pain. His instincts screamed to pull away. But there was something in the little boy's voice that made him stay. His hand moved closer, inch by inch. Jack stood nearby, tense and ready to pull his son back if things went wrong. The crowd, which had gathered into a silent circle, held its collective breath. You could hear the flutter of papers above, the wind slipping through cracks in the walls, and the faint rhythm of the boy's heartbeat in the stillness. Then his fingers touched his fur. It wasn't a rough touch. It wasn't fearful. It was gentle, like the warmth of a memory long forgotten. Max flinched at first, his head jerking back slightly, but Ethan didn't move away. He kept his hand there steady, his thumb brushing over the rough scars on his neck. "You're a good boy," he whispered. "You just forgot." Something inside the old canine broke free in that moment. His breath hitched, his body relaxed. Slowly, cautiously, he leaned forward until his forehead touched his knee. A sound escaped the crowd, a mix of gasps and quiet awe. Jack covered his mouth, tears welling in his eyes. The hardened workers, the laughing bystanders, all of them stood silent now, humbled by what they saw. Ethan giggled softly, his fingers tracing the edge of his torn ear. "See, you remember?" he said, smiling through the dirt and sunlight. You remember what it feels like to be loved? Max exhaled a long, shaky breath. His tail gave one hesitant wag, then another. The warehouse filled with quiet wonder. The same dog everyone had feared just minutes ago now sat beside a little boy, calm, trusting, alive again. Jack knelt down beside them, his voice breaking with emotion. "Looks like he's already chosen you," he said. And as the golden light poured through the cracks of the old warehouse, one thing became clear to everyone watching. This wasn't a rescue. It was a reunion of two hearts that had been waiting to find each other all along. The sun was beginning to set when they left the surplus warehouse. The sky burned orange and pink, and the warm evening breeze carried the faint scent of oil and metal from the trucks outside. Jack led his son and the newly purchased Belgian Malinois toward their small silver SUV parked near the edge of the lot. Each step the dog took was slow and uncertain, as if he didn't quite believe he was really free. Ethan held the end of the rope leash gently, not tugging, just walking beside him. "Come on, Max," he said softly, trying the name out for the first time. The dog's ears perked at the sound. It wasn't the name he'd always known, but it felt safe on his lips. He followed him, limping slightly until they reached the car. Jack opened the back door, hesitating for a second. "You sure about this, buddy?" he asked. "He's a big dog. He might not be used to car rides anymore." Ethan smiled up at him. "He'll be fine, Daddy. He's brave." For a moment, the father just stared at the muddy, scarred creature, and the little boy holding his leash like it was a lifeline. Then he sighed, half smiling. "All right, partner," he murmured, opening the door wider. "Let's go home." Max paused, staring into the car like it was another cage. Then Ethan climbed in first and patted the seat beside him. "It's okay, boy. I'll stay with you." That was all it took. The old working dog gathered his strength and stepped inside, curling himself carefully next to the little boy. As the car started and the engine rumbled, he let out a low sigh and rested his head on his lap. Ethan stroked his fur gently, whispering, "You're safe now outside?" The road stretched into the fading sunset. Jack glanced in the rearview mirror, his eyes softening as he watched his son and the dog. For the first time in a long while, there was peace on both their faces. One rediscovering love, the other finding it for the first time. The car rolled down the empty urban road, carrying with it a broken hero, a brave little boy, and the beginning of a new story neither of them could have imagined. The drive home was quiet, the hum of the tires mixing with the soft rhythm of Ethan's voice as he whispered to Max. He lay curled beside him, his head heavy on his lap, eyes half closed. But behind those tired eyes lived memories that never slept. As the car rolled down the lonely road, Max's mind drifted back to a world he once knew. The flashing red and blue lights, the sharp crackle of radios, the weight of his harness tag glinting under desert lights. Back then, he wasn't Lot 72. He was MWD 419, a legend in his unit, strong, fearless, loyal to his partner, Sergeant Mike Harlan. Together they were unstoppable. He remembered the smell of dust, the thrill of the patrol, the satisfaction of detecting threats. But more than that, he remembered Mike's voice, calm, steady, full of trust. "Good boy, Max," he'd say after every mission, his hand resting proudly on the dog's neck. To Max, that voice was home. Then came that night. The call had come in at midnight, a convoy ambush gone wrong. Mike and Max were the first to respond. The insurgents were cornered in a compound. Explosions erupted before backup arrived. Mike shouted for Max to stay back, but loyalty runs deeper than orders. When one of the threats triggered an IED, Max lunged faster than the blast that followed. He took the hit meant for his partner. Pain exploded through his side, hot and blinding. Mike's voice was the last thing he heard before the darkness took him. "Stay with me, buddy. You're going to be okay." But things were never okay again. When Max woke in the veterinary unit, the world had changed. Mike was gone, reassigned after the trauma, and the military decided Max was too injured, too unstable for duty. The medals didn't matter anymore. Neither did the years of service. He was retired, discarded like old gear. They sent him to a kennel and then to another. The lights, the alerts, the uniform all vanished. What replaced them was silence, cages, and the slow decay of a soul built for purpose. And so he learned to stop expecting kindness. Every face that passed his cage blurred into one long shadow of disappointment. Until today. Until him. Ethan's voice pulled him back from the memories. "You're safe now, Max," he whispered, brushing his tiny fingers through his fur. "You don't have to be a military dog anymore. You can just be mine." Max looked up at him, his tail giving the faintest wag. For years, he had served and protected everyone but himself. Now, for the first time, someone wanted to protect him. Jack glanced at them in the rearview mirror. Unaware of the story carried in the silence between the two, he only saw a child and his new dog. But in truth, it was something far greater. It was a broken soldier finally finding his way home. The next morning, sunlight spilled across the small front porch of the Thompson home. The air smelled of fresh-cut grass and coffee, and the quiet hum of the suburbs replaced the noise of the surplus warehouse. Max lay on an old blanket near the door, his body stiff but his eyes open, alert but not afraid. For the first time in months, he had slept without the sound of metal bars closing around him. Ethan knelt beside him, holding a small bowl of food. "Here you go, boy," he said gently, sliding it closer. Max sniffed at it cautiously before taking a tentative bite. He giggled softly. "See, it's better than the stuff they gave you before." Jack watched from the kitchen window, arms crossed, a worried look still etched on his face. "He's still a military dog at heart," he murmured. "He's trained for danger, not cuddles." But as he looked at his son smiling and talking to the old working dog, he couldn't deny the change he saw. Max's tail wagged, small, hesitant motions, but real ones. Every day became a quiet ritual of trust. Ethan brushed his fur, talking to him about his school, his drawings, and his dreams of being a hero like Daddy. Max listened to every word, his ears twitching at the sound of his laughter. At night, when storms rolled across the city, Ethan would slip out of bed and curl up beside him on the living room floor. "Don't be scared," he'd whisper. "I'm here." But it wasn't Max who needed comfort, and it was Ethan who found it in his presence. There was something in his calmness, in the weight of his head resting gently on his lap, that made him feel safe in ways words couldn't. One evening, as the golden sunset painted the walls, Jack sat beside them. He reached out slowly, his hand resting on Max's back. He tensed for a moment, then relaxed, letting out a deep sigh. Jack smiled faintly. "You're not so scary after all," he whispered. From that night on, the three of them became a small, unspoken family. The house no longer felt empty. The sound of Max's paws on the tile floor was steady, comforting, like a heartbeat filling a space that had been too quiet for too long. Wounds, both seen and unseen, take time to heal. But sometimes love, even from a child, can do what medicine never could. And in that little house at the edge of the city, a forgotten hero and a brave little boy began to teach each other how to live again. It was a calm, quiet night in the Thompson household. The clock on the wall ticked softly, and the faint hum of traffic filled the air outside. Ethan had fallen asleep on the couch, his little hand resting on Max's back. The Belgian Malinois lay beside him, half asleep but alert. A soldier's instinct that never truly faded. Jack, exhausted from his late shift at the base, turned off the last light and headed upstairs. "Good night, Max," he whispered, smiling as the dog lifted his head slightly in acknowledgement. His amber eyes followed him until the hallway light dimmed. Then the house sank into silence. But somewhere beyond the yard, that silence was broken. Two figures moved in the dark, their steps soft, deliberate. The sound of metal scraping against a window frame sliced through the stillness. Max's ears shot up, his body stiffened, every muscle locked into alert mode. He sniffed the air, unfamiliar scent, male, sweat, adrenaline, danger. He stood slowly, lowering his head as his instincts took over. His eyes darted to Ethan, still sleeping peacefully beside him. He let out a quiet whine, a sound only he could have heard. But he didn't wake. A window creaked open in the kitchen. The faint beam of a flashlight swept across the counter. A man's whisper followed. "Keep it quiet. Grab what you can." Max growled low, deep enough to shake the still air. The intruders froze. "What was that?" one hissed. "Probably just the kid's dog," the other muttered, taking another step forward. That was a mistake. Max lunged forward, silent as a shadow, his paws barely touching the floor. The intruders didn't even have time to scream before a blur of fur and fury slammed into them. The flashlight crashed to the ground, the beam spinning wildly across the walls. One man fell backward, his arm caught in Max's teeth as the dog snarled with a force that sent fear slicing through the room. "Get him off me," the man yelled, kicking wildly. His partner tried to grab a metal rod from the counter, but Max turned on him, barking with such authority that the sound echoed down the entire block. Upstairs, Jack jolted awake. "Max!" He raced down the stairs, his heart pounding. The scene froze him mid-step. The old military dog standing between his sleeping son and two terrified intruders pinned to the ground. "Max, heel!" he commanded instinctively. And just like that, the years of training snapped back. He stepped away, still growling, his eyes fixed on the men as Jack grabbed his phone. "This is Sergeant Thompson requesting immediate backup." Within minutes, sirens wailed in the distance. The intruders were handcuffed and dragged outside, muttering curses under their breath. One officer shook his head in disbelief. "That dog just saved your whole family." Jack knelt beside Max, his hands trembling. "You did it," he whispered. "You protected him." Max looked up at him, tail thumping weakly as if to say, "It's what I was born to do." And in that moment, the old working dog wasn't just a rescued dog anymore. He was a hero reborn. Red and blue lights flashed across the Thompson home, painting the night in chaos and awe. Neighbors gathered at their windows, whispering about the noise, the barking, and the brave dog who had stopped two armed men all by himself. Inside the living room was a mess. Furniture toppled, glass scattered, the signs of a struggle still fresh. But amid it all sat Max, his chest heaving, eyes alert, body planted firmly between Ethan and danger. His fur was ruffled, his legs slightly bleeding from a graze. But his posture was proud, steady, protective, unyielding. Ethan, still wrapped in a blanket, clung to his father's arm, his voice small but full of wonder. "Daddy, he saved us." Jack nodded, his throat tightening. He knelt beside Max, cupping his face gently. "Yes, buddy." He did. Then, turning to the Belgian Malinois, his voice softened to a whisper. "You really are a hero, aren't you?" Max leaned his head into his hand, his tail wagging faintly. The gesture was simple, but it carried the weight of redemption. Once rejected as unfit for duty, he had just proven that courage never expires. It only waits for the right moment to rise again. A police cruiser door opened, and a familiar voice called out, "Sergeant Thompson." Jack looked up to see a tall man step out. Major Lewis, one of the supervisors from his old unit. His eyes widened as he recognized the dog sitting beside him. "Wait a second. That's MWD 499. That's Max." Jack nodded slowly. "He was abandoned. My son found him at the auction." Major Lewis crouched, studying Max with astonishment. "We thought he didn't make it. We thought he'd been put down." His voice broke slightly. "He was one of the best dogs we ever had." Max tilted his head, recognizing the familiar scent and voice. His ears perked, and for a second, it was as though the years fell away. He was back in harness, standing tall beside his old team. Lewis smiled. "Looks like retirement didn't slow him down." The officers chuckled softly, a few even saluting the old working dog as they led the handcuffed intruders away. As the lights faded and the night grew quiet again, Jack sat beside Max, brushing his hand through his fur. "You saved us, old boy," he whispered, and for the first time in years, the retired military dog, Max, didn't feel like a memory. It felt like home again. By morning, the story had spread across the city like wildfire. News stations replayed the footage again and again. The once abandoned working dog who had saved a family from a late-night home invasion. The headline read, "Dog sold for $1 saves lives. True hero rises again." At the very same warehouse where Max had once sat in a cage, the auctioneer stood staring at a newspaper in disbelief. The photo showed Ethan hugging the old Belgian Malinois, both their faces glowing in the morning light. Around him, the same people who had laughed at the little boy whispered among themselves, "That's the same mutt from last week, the one nobody wanted, and he bought him for $1." Their voices carried a mixture of shame and wonder. Even the auctioneer's proud stance faltered. He wiped his forehead, muttering, "Guess I was wrong about that one." For the first time, his voice didn't sound so loud. Later that day, Jack and Ethan returned to the warehouse, not to buy, but to visit. Max walked proudly beside them, his fur cleaner, his posture stronger. As they entered, the chatter died instantly. People parted, eyes wide with recognition. The same dog that had once been called too mean, too old, and too broken, now walked through the warehouse like royalty. Ethan smiled shyly, waving at the people who had doubted him. "This is Max," he said simply. "He's my best friend." Max stood tall beside him, tail wagging, his amber eyes bright with quiet pride. The auctioneer stepped forward, his voice trembling. I owe you both an apology," he said. "Didn't see what you saw." Jack smiled kindly. Sometimes it takes a child's heart to see what grown-ups can't. The crowd nodded silently, the lesson hanging heavy in the air. It wasn't just a story about a dog anymore. It was a reminder that worth isn't measured by strength, youth, or price tags. As Ethan knelt and hugged Max in front of everyone, cameras flashed, and in that moment, the very warehouse that had once been filled with laughter and judgment became a place of redemption, not just for Max, but for every forgotten soul waiting for someone to see their worth. A few months later, the once-forgotten warehouse looked nothing like it did before. The cracked metal beams were repaired, the dusty floors replaced with clean mats, and a new sign hung proudly above the door. In bold letters, it read, "Max's Hope Animal Rescue and Rehabilitation Center." The transformation had been Jack's idea, but it was inspired by his son and by a $1 dog who had reminded the entire city what compassion really meant. What was once a place of neglect had become a haven for second chances. Children now visited on weekends to meet the animals. Volunteers came from nearby neighborhoods to help feed, clean, and play with dogs who had once been abandoned. And at the center of it all was Max, no longer the broken military dog in a cage, but the proud guardian of every creature that entered those doors. On a warm Saturday morning, Ethan stood beside him, his small hands holding a brush as he groomed his shiny fur. "You like being the boss, don't you?" he giggled. Max let out a soft bark, his tail thumping against the floor. His eyes, once dull and haunted, now shone with life. Jack approached from behind, carrying a donation box filled with envelopes. "You won't believe this," he said with a smile. "People from all over the state are sending letters, thanking Max for inspiring them to adopt." Ethan looked up, eyes wide. "Really?" His father nodded, handing him one of the letters. It was written in neat handwriting, signed by a little girl from another city. "Because of Max, I asked my parents to adopt a dog that no one wanted. His name is Buddy. Thank you for showing me that heroes come in all shapes and sizes." Ethan's face lit up. He knelt beside Max, hugging his neck tightly. "See, Max? You're helping everyone now." A breeze swept through the open warehouse doors, carrying the scent of fresh air and hope. Jack looked around, his heart swelling with pride. This wasn't just a rescue center. It was a symbol, proof that love could rebuild even the most broken lives. Later that evening, as the sun dipped below the skyline, Ethan and Max sat outside under the golden sky. He rested his head against his shoulder. "You know," he whispered, "I never really saved you. You saved me." Max leaned closer, pressing his head gently against him. His breathing was slow and steady, the rhythm of peace. Jack stood in the doorway, watching them with tears in his eyes. For a moment, he saw not a dog and a child, but two souls who had found each other when they needed it most. In the distance, the warehouse lights flickered on, illuminating the sign that bore Max's name. And somewhere in that quiet, the world felt a little kinder. All because one little boy saw worth in a life everyone else had forgotten. Sometimes miracles don't happen in grand gestures. Sometimes they start with a single dollar and a single act of